are now being told in advance they'll be called on?
Yes, the last news conference, I don't think it was out of magnanimity, but they wanted to showcase the variety of reporters that were now allowed to cover. Stars and Stripes, bloggers, what's her name, Ariana, and so forth, her people. So they got called, reporters. This is unheard of. They called reporters the night before and told them they would be called on and where they basically would be sitting. And I think the next step is they'd be asked what they're going to ask. I mean, that is an intrusion that is beyond the pale.
What would you think would you think that might cause reporters to not ask as tough a question if they know they're going to be called on? I mean, explain to a lay audience here why that's a bad thing. I think that
you would have a sense of gratitude. You've never been called on before. In fact, you don't show up at the White House until there's a news conference, which I resent because I think, no, the people are there plugging away trying to find the answers, ought to have first crack. But I just think that they should not be that alerted. They usually know what they're going to get the questions because wire services will always go for the headlines of the day. And that's their role, really, to emphasize the news. Someone might get up and say, how is your aching back? Or what kind of dog are you going to pick? And so forth. And we're all groaning because we think it's a throwaway. But you can write for a newspaper 50 years. Your family and friends know your byline, your preening. But television, you're on television 2 times, and you've got it made. You have a big ID. Everybody knows you, walk down the street. Haven't I seen you somewhere before? Oh, yes, in television.
Sometimes they think I'm the postman or something.
It gives you identity.
I'm very uncomfortable with learning this. I didn't know about this until you said it. But I think news conferences, if they're going to be effective, they need to be spontaneous.
That's right.
And I kind of liked it when the reporters used to jump up and try to be recognized. Now they've told everybody that you're supposed to stay seated, I guess. And I guess in previous administrations, people have held up their hand. But I've noticed a lot of presidents come in there in recent years now with a little chart, and they know where people
I like
are
pandemonium.
Yeah.
Now we're so disciplined, like Mika, we're in kindergarten and, praying they'll be called on.
I'm kind of with you on
or
this.
not be called on.
I'm a little uncomfortable with this.
Well, in the broader sense, how would you rate how today's media is covering the presidential politics in general?
Would you like to go, or do you want to?
Well,
how's the media doing these days?
How are we doing? How would you rate our coverage?
I just think they did a rotten job in the run-up to the war. President Bush definitely said almost every day we're going to war, and nobody said why. And nobody challenged the reasons they put out there. Weapons of mass destruction, absolutely a lie. Threats from Al-Qaeda, not so in Iraq, everywhere else maybe. Threat from a third world country, no. And nobody said, prove it. When Kennedy wanted us to understand our role in the Cuban Missile Crisis, he showed the missiles and so forth. So we had and the reporters played along with government censorship of wiping out. You never saw any photographs of coffins. There was no war, really. And this was a volunteer wars and so forth. So you were not affected. There was no draft. All of these things, and we played right into their hands. But when he said we're going to war, the last news conference 2 weeks before we went to war, no reporter asked why.
I would not be as hard on the press probably as my friend Helen on this. I think the great problem was that you had everybody in the government saying there were weapons of mass destruction there. And it was difficult to prove them otherwise. And I think that is what the problem was. I think what happened in retrospect is that people within the government found what they wanted to find. They saw what they were looking for, and and they simply disregarded the things that
They
didn't
interpreted
fit.
what Cheney wanted and what
Yes,
Bush
and
wanted.
they didn't, and sort of disregarded the things that didn't fit their thesis.
That's true.
But I don't know. I'm not sure how we could have known that before it happened. And that
I think because you should demand more proof. And they used Colin Powell as the last note of credibility. For anybody who was on the fence about the war, Colin Powell had so much credibility that they used him, and he knows that. One day, I mean, this is apropos of nothing, but I went to a Christmas party at Sam Donaldson's house there, and it was the start of the Clinton administration, and Powell was there talking to a friend, and I marched up to him and I said, "General, I understand that you are going to be Secretary of State under President Clinton." He turned to his friend and he said, "Isn't there some war we can send her to?" So every time I see him, he wants some war he can send me to.
But you know, bringing up Colin Powell, I think is a good example of what we were up against. I had not made up my mind where I thought it was a good idea as to whether we should go to Iraq or not, and then Colin Powell convinced me that this was something we needed to do. And somebody said to me, what in his message what was that caused you to say that we probably need to do that? And I said, it was the messenger. And it's just what you're saying. I place so much credibility on him and the fact that he was the one that said it, that's what convinced me. I was wrong. You know, I was wrong. As we now know, there were no weapons of mass destruction. But it is a difficult problem for the press when the government tells you something and you don't have the ability to know